just like I suspected, G.Loomis discontinued the E6X Steelhead rods and introduced the new GCX lineup just a few months ago. Now last December I did a review on the E6X Steelhead rods and why I like them so much. If you want to check out that video, I'll put a link above. But I had a hunch that they'd be replacing the E6X with the GCX, just like they did with their trout and bass rods. So this summer I bought a GCX Lite to use for trout fishing, and I'm sure glad I did because I had an opportunity to test it out on some big trout and it performed very well. It was definitely a step up from the GL2 trout rods that I've used in the past. So I ordered one of the GCX models that closely matched my favorite E6X, which is the 1145. Now the numbering system's changed a little bit and I'll explain that in a little bit. But in this video, we're going to go over the specs of these new rods and the models available. I also had an opportunity to talk to a G.Loomis Engineer, so I'm going to share with you what I learned there. So let's get started. I'm a longtime fan of G.Loomis rods. If you're familiar with my channel, you know I use them exclusively for steelhead, bass, and trout. In addition to the E6X models, I also have a couple IMX rods and a float series as well. But being a YouTuber, I try to be more realistic with pricing and stick with the entry-level rods, which originally was the GL2, then the E6X, and now the GCX. Now I say entry-level because they're still $350, but that's for an American-made rod. It's hard enough to convince somebody to spend that kind of money, let alone $450 plus for one of the IMX rods. I have 6 different models of the E6X, which I consider to be my workhorse rods, in different lengths and powers. Now when I first took this thing out of the tube, I thought it looked just like an E6X with different color wrap, a different logo, but the handle looked the same to me, the blank looked the same, as well as the guides, but that's to my untrained eye. So I was fortunate enough to get in contact with a G.Loomis engineer, Jesse Brummett, and he was able to point out some of the differences in this rod over the E6X. To start out with, the numbering system has completely changed, so let me go over that first. So the number system, like this one here, is the 1143. So the first 3 numbers is the length. So 114, if you divide that by 12, it's going to be 9.5. So this is a 9.5 foot rod. The last number is the power. So 3 is now a medium heavy. It used to be 5 as a medium heavy, and that's why the 1145 was the model that I liked for bead fishing. So I'll put up a list of the new powers on the screen here, with 5 being extra heavy and 00 being ultra light. So when I asked Jesse if there's anything different with the actual blank, he said that there's not too much different with the actual blank. They're matched to the E6X rods as far as their actions and powers. The one thing he did point out that's different is the guides. They have been upgraded. They're a different Fuji guide than on the E6X. And so I grabbed one of those and compared those. They're definitely different. So what Jesse explained is the new guides have better contact points with the blank, therefore they're less likely to bend. They're also considered to be tangle-free, therefore less likely to tip wrap, which is the nemesis for steelhead float anglers. So next, I asked Jesse why G.Loomis only offers their steelhead rods with cork handles instead of synthetics, which I don't like. Synthetics are fine for trolling rods, but for winter steelhead fishing, I want a cork handle. I don't think that cork transfers the cold to your hand as bad as synthetics do, plus I feel like cork is just a little bit grippier. Well, what Jesse told me is cork is G.Loomis's traditional brand image, and their field testers and customers like the cork better, and I'm very thankful for that. So Jesse did say that there's a little bit difference in the actual butt cap of the GCX rods, that it's actually a plug that they put in before the rod handle's finished, and it actually protects the end of the blank, but then they sand it down so it's flush. And I had to grab one of my E6X rods to kind of look at the difference there, and for sure you can feel a little bit of a step down, like on this rod right here. So this end cap is just a little less finished than like this rod here. So this just looks a little bit better and feels just a little bit better as well. So one difference with the GCX that I actually noticed before calling Jesse is that the hook keeper is more on the bottom of the blank, so if you're holding the rod, it's pointing more down. The reason that that's important to me is the old E6X rods, the hook keeper was on the side. So every once in a while, you'd go to cast and your line will grab that. It doesn't happen very often, but if it does, it basically grabs your line and all of your gear just slaps the water. So Jesse verified that that is part of the new design. So the last thing that Jesse pointed out with the new GCX Steelhead and salmon lineup is the fish is the same on all, because sometimes in the past with other rod series, they would have a different fish on the salmon rod as they would on the steelhead rod. And some people would get hung up like they wouldn't want to use a salmon rod for steelhead fishing or vice versa. So they made it a generic fish and it looks really nice. So it could be a steelhead, salmon, or even a trout. And I can relate to that because my Rage Fishing logo could be one of the three as well. So a quick shout out to Jesse. Thanks for taking the time to point out the improvements on the GCX over the E6X, because I probably wouldn't have noticed without talking to you. So thank you. Alright, so there's 14 different rods in the GCX Steelhead lineup. There's 6 spinning rods, 2 float rods, which are also spinning rods, 4 casting rods, and 2 center pin rods. Now, the reason that I went with the 1143 and the spinning rod is because I like a 9.5 foot rod. Most of the rivers that I fish on the Oregon coast have a lot of overhang. They're small to medium-sized rivers, so I don't like to go much longer than 9.5. So most of the rods you'll see me fishing with are 8.5 to 9.5 feet in length. Recently, I stepped up to using a medium heavy power, and that's what the 1143 is. The E6X was an 1145, but again, the 1143 was the model that I chose to go with because that has been the rod that I've been using the most. So let's go over the different models and I'll kind of explain to you which ones that I would use and for what purpose. Before I go over the different models, I'm going to explain the difference between power and action because I think a lot of people get it wrong. I'm going to use a little GL2 trout rod that I have. It's a 5.5 foot ultralight. So power is the amount of force it takes to flex a rod. So in ultralight power, it doesn't take a whole lot of force like this rod right here to bend that rod. The opposite end of that would be heavy or extra heavy, so it takes a lot more force to bend that rod. Action is where the rod bends. So on one end you got like a fast action, which this is actually a fast action. So what that means is most of the bend is going to be in the tip of the rod. The opposite of that would be a slow action, to where you have a rod that bends all the way down to the grip. And in between is going to be a moderate action, which it bends all the way into the middle of that blank. So that's the difference between power and action. Okay, so to go over the different spinning models, there's 2 8.5 foot rods, 2 9s, and 2 9.5 foot models. Now, in the 8.5 foot rods, there's what's called a mag medium. It's the 1022. That's a rod that I would choose for fishing spinners. I like a shorter rod for fishing spinners. I feel like I can be more accurate, and you just don't need a longer rod for spinner fishing. There's also the 1023, which is a medium heavy power, and that might be a rod that you might want to use for maybe drift fishing or fishing a little bit bigger spinner or spoon. They have that rod model in a casting series as well. That might be a rod that I would choose for fishing bigger spinners or spoons or drift fishing. The 9 foot models, some of the rivers I fish have a lot of overhang, and even 9.5 foot rods can be a little bit long. So I actually have 2 E6X rods in a medium light and in a medium, and they have similar rods in the GCX series as well. They have a medium light, which is the 1081, and the 1083 is a medium heavy. So the 1081 could be like a good jig fishing rod because it's a little bit lighter power, and the medium heavy, the 1083, would be a good bead fishing rod if you're in really tight quarters. So then of course they have the 2 9'6" models. The 1141, which is the old specs of the E6X 1143, so it's a medium light. And then the one that I bought, which is the 1143, it's a medium heavy 9.5 foot. The float series rods, they're 10 feet long, both of them. Again, one comes in a medium light and one comes in a medium heavy. So if you have a little bit wider open river, or you're fishing a big river that doesn't have a lot of overhang, then I would probably recommend going with the 10 foot models. So in the casting series, they have an 8.5 foot medium heavy. It's the 1023. That'd be a good rod for casting bigger spinners and spoons. I like using a casting reel when the water's a little bit higher so you can really dig those spinners and spoons in. They also have two 9-foot models, also in the medium heavy and even in a heavy power, if you want just a little bit more length for drift fishing or spinner or spoon fishing. And then they have a 9.5-foot medium light. So if you're a guy that likes to use a float rod with a casting reel, that would probably be the rod that you would want to choose. So they also have two center pin models, 11-foot 4 and 13-foot, both in a medium light, moderate action if you're into center pin fishing. So one of the most important features to me in a steelhead rod is its weight. And that's why I've enjoyed fishing with these E6X fishing rods, is because they're so lightweight. So I'm going to weigh my 1145 and compare it to the GCX 1143 just to see how they compare. So we'll start out 1145 E6X. So just as I remember, it's 5.6 ounces. So now, I'm going to take off, these are fishing rod butlers if you want to know what those are. They're just a great way to hold your two rod pieces together. Guess I got to cut off the tag. Alright, so the GCX. Oh, it's touching the table. It's 5.7 ounces, so it's 1/10 of an ounce more, and that's probably in the guides is my guess, because the guides have a little bit more material to them, but we're talking fractions of an ounce there, so it's about the same weight. Another point I'd like to make about G.Loomis rods in general is their strength. If you watched one of my most recent videos, Steelhead Road Trip Part 2, you know I hooked a big wild buck and it ran down into some rapids and got my line wrapped around a boulder. Well, I have never put that much pressure on a fish. Let's take a look. Man, I'm glad I have my meat pole for this. Come on, man. I'm pretty much just holding my spool at this point. So yeah, that was my 1145 E6X. That just goes to show how powerful these rods are. I think at one point in the fight I actually said, I don't even care if this rod breaks right now, which probably isn't true. But regardless, if you want to see the entire video, I'll put a link above. So all models in the GCX Steelhead lineup are $350. Now, I rarely pay full price for a Loomis rod because I generally can find them on sale. For instance, like Fishfield sometimes has 15% off and they have free shipping over $250, so that can save you over $50 on a Loomis Steelhead rod. Cabela's even recently had 15% off on Mondays for club members, so you can always find deals like that to get a little bit of a discount even on G.Loomis rods. I'm going to put these two rods together. My office is super small, but I'm just going to see if I can kind of get a basic feel for how it... I mean, it feels a lot like the E6X. Let me put the E6X together and just compare the two. Okay, let's try them both together at the same time, just to see if there's any difference in the actual... I'm just going to get them side by side and just kind of... I mean, they just seem very similar. So overall, I'm satisfied with the way that the rod looks. The handle is really nice. The cork doesn't have a bunch of filler in it, so I'm happy with that. The actual graphite, the blank, is just smooth. Has a little bit of lamination over the logo area, which looks good. I can't wait to try it out. Normally I would do some field testing as part of a review video, but the rivers are blown out right now. So I'll have to do some additional testing on this and maybe compare it with the E6X rods and do a future video just comparing the two. I have a Shimano Vanford A. It's the newest Shimano Vanford spinning reel. It's in the 3000. This thing is like butter. So this is going to get loaded up with some Power Pro Super Slick, go on this rod, and I'm going to be primarily bead fishing with this rod here. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment field below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you're not subscribed, consider subscribing, hit the bell so you don't miss future videos. And if this video was helpful, give me a thumbs up, that helps me out on YouTube. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.